There was a familiar calm in his voice whenever Ron Howard spoke about childhood, a practiced steadiness that made every story sound lighter than it truly was. He often said there were no extreme rules in his home, no harsh expectations, no overbearing supervision. His parents, according to him, were perfectly reasonable. But underneath that calm surface, there were memories that had followed him into adulthood, lingering like the last echo of a rumor that would never die. And one of those memories resurfaced in 1973 in a way he never expected. It happened during the filming of American Graffiti when Harrison Ford and Paul Le Mat cornered him outside a trailer. The night was warm, the set was noisy, and Ron was only 19. Without warning, bottles were thrown toward his car. Laughter erupted. Someone shouted, "Dance, Opie, dance!" He was shoved inside a trailer and locked in, left to sit in silence while the cast continued rehearsals. They called it Opie shaming. It lasted only a few minutes, but the humiliation lingered for decades. He would later say that moment haunted him more than any professional failure he ever faced. What few knew at the time was that this event was not an isolated eruption of cruelty. It was only one of many shadows stretching across Ron Howard's life. For nearly 50 years, he remained a quiet figure in an industry that rewarded noise. He avoided public fights, he chose calm over spectacle, and he carried his private wounds without making them part of his public image. But that image, America's favorite director, the gentle storyteller, the calm technician, hid a history of accidents, legal battles, fears, rejections, and private grief. What looked like a clean, steady ascent was, in truth, a journey marked by narrow escapes and difficult truths. Long before Hollywood knew him as a director, he was the little red-haired boy from Duncan, Oklahoma. Born on March 1, 1954, Ron entered a world where dreams outweighed stability. His father, Rance Howard, was trying to break through as an actor and writer, and his mother, Jean, was an actress who understood the uncertainty of the business. Money was scarce. In 1958, when Ron was only 4, his parents packed everything they owned into one small vehicle and drove to California. Burbank offered no guarantees, only the chance that something might change if they stayed long enough. Their house was small, barely enough for 3 people, and every month felt like a negotiation between hope and survival. Yet they lived a short walk from a movie studio. Ron would watch lights, cameras, and crews as if he were studying a new language. Instead of attending a traditional preschool, he learned from the environment around him, sets, sound stages, scripts, and the quiet routines of working actors. No one planned for him to enter the industry, but Hollywood drifted toward him like gravity. His first role came not from ambition, but from necessity. In 1956, when he was 18 months old, his father needed a baby for a brief scene in a film called Frontier Woman. Ron crawled across a set, unaware that this tiny moment would begin a lifetime in front of the camera. By 1958, even as his parents struggled, they made one rule clear: he would not be a full-time actor until he turned 5. That rule nearly pushed the family back into poverty. Offers were turned down, contracts refused, and financial stability slipped further out of reach. Still, his parents held firm. The moment Ron turned 5, everything changed. But childhood fame came with burdens no child could fully understand. As he stepped into the next chapter of his life, the world saw only innocence and charm. Behind the scenes, pressures were rising, expectations were tightening, and danger was closer than anyone realized. But the world was not done testing him yet. The Fall of a Child Star. For most viewers in the United States, the final episode of The Andy Griffith Show in 1968 was a moment of gentle nostalgia. The familiar streets of Mayberry faded out, and the child everyone had watched grow up on screen smiled one last time. But for Ron Howard, the end of the series marked the beginning of a quiet crisis that would shape the next 4 years of his life. He was 14, walking away from a role that had defined nearly his entire childhood, and the industry that had embraced him suddenly did not know what to do with him. The truth settled in slowly, casting its shadow over the late months of 1968 and the full stretch of 1969. Ron expected new opportunities. Instead, he found closed doors. Casting directors, while polite, continued to see only Opie Taylor, the softest-spoken child of Mayberry. They could not imagine him as someone older, someone more complex, someone capable of carrying a new character without the weight of the old one. More than 50 auditions came and went. Most ended with the same quiet response. He was too recognizable, too symbolic, too gentle, too much like the boy audiences had memorized. The rejection bruised him in ways he rarely spoke about. His father, Rance Howard, would drive him to sets, rehearsals, and taped auditions, offering encouragement with the same steady tone he had used years earlier when the family lived in a cramped Burbank house. But Ron felt the pressure tightening. He had spent 8 years inside a global television phenomenon. Now he walked into rooms where people smiled kindly and told him they had decided to go in a different direction. He pretended it did not affect him, but it did. According to later interviews, this period planted the first seeds of anxiety he ever experienced. Still, he worked when he could. The roles were small, the pay was modest, and the hours were long. In 1969, he appeared briefly in Gentle Ben for $500 per episode. It was a fraction of what he earned during the Andy Griffith Show, but he had no desire to cling to his past. He needed new ground, even if that ground felt unstable. At the same time, he was trying to live the life of a normal teenager. He played basketball at school, averaging 12 points a game. He studied quietly, avoided unnecessary attention, and tried to blend in with classmates who could not imagine what it felt like to grow up on television. By 1970, the pressure had begun to turn inward. That was the year he met Cheryl Alley, a girl from John Burroughs High School. She had warm confidence, dark hair, and a quiet humor that steadied him in ways he did not yet understand. Their first date was on November 1st. They watched It Is a Mad, 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 Mad World and shared pizza. It was uncomplicated, almost ordinary, and this normalcy felt like relief. But in late December, a rumor spread across the school. A classmate claimed Cheryl was pregnant. Within weeks, the story reached teachers, parents, and eventually local tabloids. Ron denied the rumor publicly in the student newspaper, but the damage was already done. He lost a guest role worth $2,000 because producers feared the attention. Cheryl was devastated. She had never asked for the spotlight, and now she found her name printed next to accusations that had no basis in fact. Ron supported her as best he could. His instinct was to shield people he cared about, the same instinct he would carry into adulthood. But he could not shield everything. In February 1971, the rumor resurfaced again with new embellishments, fueled by the media's fascination with child stars stumbling into adulthood. The scrutiny strengthened their relationship, but it also reminded Ron that fame was never gentle, even when he tried to stand far from its reach. During that same year, financial struggle returned in a way that felt familiar. Ron took a job delivering newspapers. He woke before dawn, folding 200 papers each morning, earning $150 a month. He used the money for gas, small meals, and weekend outings with Cheryl. It was unglamorous work, but he treated it with the same discipline that had once carried him through rehearsals as a child. He wanted to contribute, to prove that he could stand on his own, even if adulthood still felt distant. Then, on April 5, 1971, fate shifted again. Ron was driving to an audition when a truck slammed into the back of his car. The impact snapped his neck forward. He suffered whiplash that would follow him through the rest of his early acting career. The medical bills reached $3,000, a heavy amount for a teenager with no insurance. To cover the costs, he sold his bike for $200. The accident forced him to delay his next role, deepening his sense that life was pulling him backward. Yet he moved forward, slowly, quietly, with a determination that did not announce itself. By 1972, Ron tried to reframe his life. He showed up for auditions. He managed his anxiety. He played basketball. He held tightly to the normality that Cheryl gave him. But the industry kept him in a box he could not escape. He was no longer a child and not yet an adult, trapped between two versions of himself, unsure which one Hollywood would accept. Everything changed in 1973. George Lucas cast him in American Graffiti, a low-budget film set in California. Ron stepped onto the set with cautious optimism. For the first time in years, he felt the possibility of reinvention. The cameras rolled. The nights stretched late. The cast bonded in the way young actors often did. But even there, the ghost of Opie followed him. Harrison Ford and Paul Le Mat were older, confident, and unrestrained. Their teasing started lightly, then sharpened. On July 15th, beer bottles were thrown near Ron's car. The laughter that followed was not playful. On July 20th, they locked him inside a trailer, preventing him from reaching rehearsals. They mocked him openly and even spiked his drinks. Ron endured it in silence. Later, he called this period the only time he had ever experienced true Opie shaming. The film became a monumental success, earning $115 million on a budget of $707,000. Yet Ron received only $10,000 for his work. He asked George Lucas directly for 1% of the profits, worth more than $1 million. Lucas declined. Their friendship never fully healed, but something else emerged from that painful period. Ron realized that if he remained an actor, he would always be chasing labels that others created for him. There was only one path that could move him beyond Opie Taylor and beyond Richie Cunningham. It was a path that demanded reinvention, control, and vision. He had only one way out, and it was not acting. When Ron Howard stepped into the role of Richie Cunningham in January 1974, he felt a cautious sense of renewal. Happy Days was a bright, nostalgic portrait of American youth, and the very first episode drew 11 million viewers. The network celebrated. The cast celebrated. Audiences embraced the fresh sincerity that Ron brought to the screen. For a brief moment, it felt as if the turbulence of his post-Opie years had finally settled. But as much as the spotlight warmed him, it also cast longer shadows he had not anticipated. During the early months of the show, Ron worked with the same discipline that had carried him through childhood. He arrived on set early, memorized his lines carefully, and treated every rehearsal as if the longevity of the entire series rested on his shoulders. He felt grateful for the work, and he tried to stay focused on the craft rather than the noise around him. But Happy Days was not only a program. It was a cultural wave gathering momentum, and that wave soon shifted in a direction no one predicted. By 1976, the breakout character was no longer Richie. It was Fonzie, played by Henry Winkler, whose charisma seemed to explode across the country. Fonzie became a symbol of effortless cool, a figure so iconic that children wore jackets like his, adults quoted his lines, and radio stations replayed scenes from the show as if they were songs. Merchandise alone generated more than $1 million in that year. The network executives at ABC began to see the show through new eyes. They proposed a dramatic rebranding. They wanted to rename it Fonzie's Happy Days. For Ron, this moment struck deeply. He had carried the show from the beginning. The premise had been built around Richie's experiences, Richie's home, Richie's circle of friends. He never resented Henry Winkler's rising fame, but the proposed title change felt like a rewriting of history, a silent erasure of the work he had put into the series. In November 1976, after quiet deliberation, he delivered a direct ultimatum to the producers. If the name changed, he would walk away, contract or not. The conflict was not contained. When the news leaked to Variety on December 5th, an extraordinary wave of public response followed. More than 10,000 letters arrived at ABC. Fans insisted that Richie was the heart of the show, that removing him from the center would break its spirit. Under the pressure, ABC relented. The title remained Happy Days. Ron stayed. But something changed inside him. He had learned what it felt like to fight for artistic identity, and he sensed that acting alone could not offer him the future he wanted. He needed a path where he could shape a story from behind the camera, not merely interpret one in front of it. The tension did not stop there. As the show grew more successful, its internal fractures widened. By 1977, the series generated $50 million annually, one of the most profitable programs on American television. Yet the cast was divided by pay gaps that quietly fueled resentment. Ron earned $25,000 per episode. Henry Winkler, now the face of a cultural phenomenon, earned $75,000. Anson Williams, who played Potsy, earned $12,000. Jealousy became a silent current running beneath the surface. The pressure erupted on November 16, 1976, during the filming of an episode titled The Muckrakers. Williams, frustrated with his limited role and the perception that scenes were being rewritten in Ron's favor, reportedly stormed off the set. Rumors circulated about shouting, accusations of favoritism, and even a physical confrontation, although nothing was proven. ABC executives intervened quickly, smoothing tensions to protect what they called a $50 million machine. Yet the incident remained a reminder that success often magnified insecurities rather than erasing them. Despite the turmoil, Ron continued working with a quiet steadiness. But he was no longer thinking solely as an actor. In early 1975, while the series continued to rise in popularity, he began recording his first short film. It was titled Deed of Daring Do, a 10-minute project crafted during a 2-week production break. He funded it with $2,000, borrowed equipment, and the help of a few willing friends. Even Henry Winkler made a brief appearance. Ron treated the project with seriousness, approaching each scene with the precision of someone auditioning for an entirely different career. The short film was not without obstacles. On April 20th, producer Roger Corman requested additional footage, forcing Ron to schedule reshoots that cost $500 he could barely spare. Rumors later surfaced that the film borrowed too heavily from another work, but investigators found no proof. By June 15th, the short premiered at a small festival. 3 months later, on September 10th, it won a minor prize at the Atlanta Film Festival. The award was a quiet affirmation, a signal that Ron's instincts behind the camera were valid. The experience pushed him toward something bigger. In 1977, at only 23 years old, he directed Grand Theft Auto, a low-budget action film that he also co-wrote with his father, Rance Howard. The production cost $600,000 and earned $15 million. On paper, it was a triumph. But behind the scenes, a stunt went horribly wrong. Stuntman Paul Bartel sustained serious injuries, including broken bones and internal damage. Ron faced the real fear that his directing career might end before it fully began. The lawsuit that followed was settled quietly in 1978, but the experience stayed with him for decades. It became one of the reasons he would later insist on meticulous safety protocols. Through all of this, Ron's personal life provided stability. He married Cheryl Alley on June 7, 1975, at a modest ceremony in Burbank. The wedding cost $800. 300 guests attended. Henry Winkler served as best man. The next day, Ron and Cheryl left for a 2-week honeymoon in Hawaii, deliberately choosing simplicity over spectacle. Their life together grew in the spaces between the chaos of Hollywood, small dinners at home, long drives, early mornings spent discussing nothing in particular. But even marriage could not disguise the growing truth inside him. Acting had given him a livelihood, but directing gave him purpose. As the years passed, this truth became impossible to ignore. By midpoint 1980, despite Happy Days reaching 20 million viewers each week, Ron made a decision that startled both fans and the network. ABC refused to let him direct television movies. They offered him $100,000 for another 3 years of acting, but no creative control. On July 20th, he signed a $1 million contract with NBC that granted him precisely what he wanted: authorship. When news reached ABC, more than 15,000 letters arrived from fans begging him to return. But it was too late. Ron had stepped across a threshold he had been approaching for years. He had left Opie behind. He had left Richie behind. Now, he was stepping into a world where the light was brighter, the expectations heavier and the risks far more dangerous. But Hollywood was about to show him what true danger looked like. When Ron Howard stepped away from Happy Days in 1980, he entered a decade that would test every conviction he carried. The move to directing was not simply a career shift. It was a step into a landscape where every decision could ignite conflict, reveal hidden resentments, or expose him to dangers far more literal than those he had faced as an actor. What followed was a series of films that shaped his reputation not only as a filmmaker, but also as a quiet navigator of chaos. His early directing years began gently enough, but the tempo changed quickly. The set of Splash in 1983, a romantic fantasy starring Tom Hanks, became his first real confrontation with the volatility of leading actors. The film was shot in New York during the summer heat, and the pressure of studio expectations weighed heavily on the cast. Hanks, still early in his career, struggled with sudden script changes and long production days. On July 15th, frustration escalated. A heated exchange erupted between Hanks and members of the crew. The shouting intensified until Ron himself intervened, stepping between the parties before the argument turned physical. The incident nearly halted the production. There were moments when the studio considered canceling the project entirely. In the end, Disney rescued it through the newly formed Touchstone label, allowing filming to continue. When Splash finally premiered on March 9, 1984, and earned nearly $70 million on an $11 million budget, audiences never knew how close the film had come to collapsing. His next major project, Cocoon, introduced another kind of stress, one that forced Ron to confront danger outside the set. In early 1985, an extra named Harold Jenkins was dismissed from production. On February 12th, Jenkins sent several threatening letters to Ron and the film's staff, claiming the movie insulted elderly people and promising retaliation. The situation escalated so quickly that the studio hired around-the-theater clock security at a cost of $150,000. The script was softened, and the release delayed until June 21st. Despite the turmoil, the film earned $85 million and won 2 Academy Awards. Yet the incident taught Ron that even storytelling, when misinterpreted, could push people into fury. Then came Willow, a long-gestating fantasy developed from George Lucas' original idea from 1972. Lucas and Ron had worked together peacefully on American Graffiti, but the scale of Willow introduced creative clashes neither of them expected. In June 1987, during the most critical budgeting phase, a $5 million cut became the center of an argument that lasted days. Ron considered leaving the project. Lucas insisted the cut was essential. Each believed the other was compromising the film. Although they completed the production, the tension left its mark. When Willow premiered on May 20, 1988, it earned more than $137 million worldwide, but still lost money due to large marketing costs. Home video eventually pulled it out of immediate deficit, yet the emotional cost on both men was harder to measure. The following year, Ron directed Parenthood, a film inspired in part by his own chaotic journey through fatherhood. The production seemed steady until May 1989, when writer Elena Vasquez filed a lawsuit claiming the film stole material from her script. The case threatened to delay the release. Ron negotiated quietly, choosing discretion over confrontation. In June 1989, he settled for $500,000, clearing the path for the film to debut. When Parenthood earned $126 million on a $20 million budget, audiences saw only a warm story about family life. They never saw the legal storm behind it. But no film tested Ron more directly or physically than Backdraft in 1990. The production relied on real flames, controlled burns, and sets designed to mimic the unpredictable behavior of fire. On July 23rd, a stunt sequence ignited with more force than expected. Flames spread faster than the safety team could respond. Kurt Russell burned his hand and face while trying to escape the collapsing structure. 3 other crew members also suffered burns. The incident triggered an OSHA investigation, which identified serious safety violations. Ron later said the production taught him something profound. Fire, he noted, does not behave for the camera. It behaves only for itself. Still, he persisted. His next major release, Apollo 13, became one of the defining films of his career. But even that success came with turbulence. In October 1994, Tom Hanks insisted the script must follow NASA transcripts with absolute precision. When Ron agreed but requested time to adjust the screenplay, the production halted on October 15th. The shutdown cost $2 million in only a few days. On October 18th, exhausted by negotiations and delays, Ron considered leaving the project. NASA officials stepped in to mediate, restoring calm. When the film finally premiered in 1995 and earned more than $350 million, its triumph masked the near collapse behind the scenes. Then came the year 1996, when the line between fiction and real danger blurred in a way Ron had never encountered. While directing Ransom, he received several letters threatening his children. The threats mirrored the kidnapping themes of the film. The FBI tapped the family's phones, monitored suspicious cars circling their home, and recommended relocation. On March 5th, Ron moved his family temporarily to another location. No arrests were made, but authorities believed the suspects fled California in April. Ron later admitted that the incident made Ransom his most personal and unsettling project.